All right, back to Unit 1, exploring one variable data. This topic is 1.3, representing a categorical variable with tables. So there's a couple different ways you could represent the information you learn from a categorical variable in a table. It's actually really simple and really easy, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of these. First, let me remind you that a categorical variable is a variable that puts you or the individual into a particular category. Remember, think words here. So here's a frequency table. It's actually really simple. Frequency is just a fancy word for counts. How many did you count in each category? So imagine you have this huge survey. You ask all these people, what is their ethnicity? And you have a ton of data. And now you want to count how many people fell into each category. It's that simple. So you say, okay, there were 132 people that I counted fell into the white ethnicity, 88 black or African Americans, and so forth. So literally a frequency table is nothing more than a list of all the different categories that somebody could have picked, and all the different counts of how many people fell into each category. It's really that simple. And then at the very bottom there, we have our grand total. That's a frequency table. Again, just keep in mind, frequency, fancy word for counts. We could also do what's called a relative frequency table. A relative frequency table just turns those counts into percentages. That's it. So if we go back to a regular frequency table and we look at the white category, we have 132 divided by 260 gives us a proportion of 0.5077. Now remember, that's what a proportion is. It's part of the whole. So we do that for each category all the way down to the Native American, which was 1 out of 260, which was 0.0038. Then we turn those into percentages. So keep in mind that a proportion is the same thing as a percentage. So once we have that proportion, all we do is move the decimal 2 times to make it a percentage. Keep in mind that if you do write something as a percentage, you must have the percent sign. Every now and then you'll get some students that'll write 50.77. They never put the percent sign, so then it's kind of confusing. Is that a proportion? Is that a percent? What the heck does that represent? So if you do represent something as a percentage, make sure you use that percent sign. So this is a relative. Remember, we call it a relative frequency table because it means relative to the whole, right? So there are 132 people that are white, but if you think about it, that alone doesn't really tell you anything. Now, obviously, in a frequency table, we do have the total at the bottom, but if I just said, hey, 132 people were white, that doesn't really tell you anything. Is that a lot of people? Is that a little bit of people? Because it all depends on your size, right? If our sample size was 1 million people, then 132 is actually very small. If our sample size was 140 people, then 132 is huge. So sometimes frequency or a relative frequency table is actually better because it puts the counts, the frequencies, relative to the whole, so you can get a better understanding of, in that group, what percent came from what category. And that's the advantage of a relative frequency table. So when you think relative, or when you hear relative, or you're asked about relative in a test or a quiz, keep in mind relative means proportion or percent. Which brings me to the last topic of this very short video for 1.2 or 1.3, is that keep in mind percentages, relative frequencies, and rates are all providing the same information as proportions. Got a lot of kids that think these are all different, but when you see, hey, what's the percentage? What's the relative frequency? Hey, what's the rate? That's all the same thing as a proportion. And again, you could write proportions all different ways, right? And that's the key thing. For example, 50%. I could write that as 0.50. I could write that as 1/2. I could write that as 5/10. I could write that as 50 out of 100. They're all representing the exact same piece of information, just in a different format. And again, these are the 2 different types of tables that can be used for categorical data. And the point of these tables is it allows you to kind of make some sense of all your data, right? When you first collect all your data, you have all these survey papers, or maybe you compiled it into a spreadsheet or something on your computer, but you need to collect all this information and put it in one of these tables so you can say, oh, there's more white people, or there's very few Pacific Islanders. And then again, a relative frequency table even makes it more clear that you could put it into percentage. So you could actually learn, okay, from this group, I had far more white and African Americans than anybody else was even close. I mean, Pacific Islander and Native American were all clearly under 1%. So that's the kind of information that you could learn and then convey for your survey results. All right, guys, that's it for this video over representing categorical variables with tables. Pretty easy, but I will say that a lot of kids kind of get confused with this proportion percentage thing. So just keep in mind that they're all the same thing, whatever you call it. We just have different names for it. So on a test or a quiz, if it asks for a proportion and you put 0.5, I'm going to give you full credit, even if you put 50%. And even if you put 1/2, I can't say you're wrong. So all different kind of ways that we can express the same information. All right, that's it. Enjoy.